My name is Jack Turner, and if you drive far enough outside the town of Ridge County, you'll eventually reach a long dirt road that runs between open fields and old oak trees. At the end of that road sits my ranch. It's not fancy, but it's peaceful. 300 acres of pasture, a red barn that has been repaired more times than I can count, and a narrow wooden bridge that crosses a shallow creek before the road reaches the main gate. That bridge had been there longer than I had. In fact, county records said it was built sometime in the late 1970s when the original ranch owners needed a way to move cattle across the creek during the rainy season. Over the years I reinforced it with steel beams and replaced the planks, but the structure itself stayed in the same place. For decades it worked perfectly. Then, about 6 years ago, a housing development was built right next to my western fence line. The development was called Maple Ridge Estates, and like most modern developments, it came with something that caused more trouble than anything else: an HOA. The president of that HOA was a woman named Karen Whitfield. If you asked the residents, they'd tell you Karen treated HOA rules like they were state law. She monitored lawns, complained about fence colors, and constantly reminded everyone about neighborhood standards. At first, Karen didn't bother me much. My ranch wasn't technically inside the HOA boundary. It had been there decades before the houses were built. But eventually Karen started paying attention to the bridge. The creek that ran through my property also formed part of the natural boundary between my ranch and the housing development. My bridge crossed the creek on my land and connected to a dirt road that led to the county highway. One afternoon, Karen showed up near the bridge while I was repairing a section of railing. She stood there with her arms crossed, looking at it like it was a problem waiting to be solved. "That structure doesn't meet community safety standards," she said. I looked around. "This structure isn't part of your community," I replied. Karen shook her head. "It's visible from the neighborhood," she said. "Residents have concerns." I had heard that phrase before. Concerns usually meant someone didn't like looking at something. "The bridge has been here for 40 years, I told her. "Well," Karen said, "things change." She left after that, but I could tell the conversation wasn't over. 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the HOA claiming the bridge posed a safety hazard to nearby residents and requesting that it be removed. I ignored the letter, because the bridge wasn't on HOA land, it was on mine. For a while, nothing happened. Then one morning I woke up to the sound of heavy machinery. At first I thought a construction crew was working somewhere in the neighborhood, but when I stepped outside and looked toward the creek, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A bulldozer and a small crew of contractors were standing near the bridge, and half the wooden structure had already been torn apart. I drove down there immediately. "Stop," I shouted as I jumped out of the truck. The workers shut the machines down and looked at me. One of them explained they had been hired by the Maple Ridge HOA to remove a dangerous structure. I looked at the broken planks scattered in the water and felt my blood pressure rising. That bridge had been standing for decades, and now it was gone. Karen arrived a few minutes later in her usual white SUV. She stepped out like she expected me to thank her. "That bridge was unsafe," she said. "You destroyed private property," I replied. Karen waved a folder in the air. "The HOA authorized the removal." I pointed toward the ground. "This isn't HOA land," she didn't answer. Instead, she got back in her SUV and drove away. The contractors packed up their equipment and left soon after. For the first time since I bought the ranch, the road connecting my land to the county highway was cut off. Without the bridge, vehicles couldn't cross the creek. Cattle trucks couldn't pass. Supply deliveries couldn't reach the barn. Karen had effectively blocked access to my own property. Most people would have immediately called a lawyer, and I did speak with one. But before anything else happened, I spent a few days studying the property maps. That's when I noticed something interesting. The housing development had been built around a large drainage system designed to control rainwater runoff from the hills. Several drainage channels connected to the same creek that ran through my ranch. According to the county survey, those drainage lines crossed land that technically belonged to me. Not much land, just narrow strips along the creek. But, legally speaking, they were mine, and that meant something important. If the creek flow changed, the drainage system for the entire neighborhood would change too. So I contacted a construction company, and then I contacted the county planning office. Everything I did was perfectly legal. Within 2 weeks, excavation equipment arrived at the edge of my property near the development. The crew began digging a deep trench that ran along the property boundary, following the natural path of the creek. Day by day, the trench widened and filled with water. It eventually formed a long channel that curved around the side of Maple Ridge Estates. In simple terms, it became a moat. Technically, it was just an expanded drainage channel built on my land. But from the neighborhood side, it looked exactly like a moat surrounding their development. Within days, Karen came storming down the dirt road again. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Improving my property," I said calmly. She pointed toward the water channel. "That's blocking the development." I shrugged. "You blocked my bridge." Karen looked furious. Within a week, the HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting. Apparently, the new water channel had disrupted their drainage system and limited access for construction vehicles entering the neighborhood. The board members asked if there was any way to resolve the situation. I told them there was. First, the HOA would need to pay for rebuilding the bridge they destroyed. Second, they would need to formally acknowledge my property boundaries. And third, they would stop interfering with ranch structures that had been there long before their development existed. The board members agreed almost immediately. Karen sat there silently while the rest of the HOA voted. Within a month, a brand new reinforced bridge was built across the creek, stronger than the old one, wider too. And the drainage trench around the development remained exactly where it was. These days, when I drive across that bridge and look toward Maple Ridge Estates, I sometimes notice the long water channel running along the fence line. Most residents probably think it's just part of the landscape, but I remember exactly why it's there. Because when the HOA tore down my ranch bridge, they accidentally gave me the perfect reason to build a moat around their neighborhood.